Have you ever noticed that there are these certain seasons of life when it seems like we grow and learn more rapidly than normal? I've heard people say things like, when I spent that summer backpacking through Europe, I just learned so much about myself. Or when I spent I did that tour of Afghanistan in the Army, it really changed me. Or when I was in college and I was in that Christian student group, man, I just grew like crazy during that time. Sometimes it's even really hard things. When I spent that year and a half unemployed, it just taught me so much about life. So yeah, we can learn and we can change at any time in life, but it seems like God has these growth spurt moments, these times when he's doing his deepest work in us during these special seasons. Guys, we are all in one of those seasons right now. And we didn't choose this, we can't control this, but if we are open to what God is wanting to do in us through this, I really believe that we will look back one day and we'll say, you know what, the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, that's one of the big reasons that I am the person who I am today. And I hope that's a really exciting thought for you, that you could actually come out of this a significantly better version of yourself. So we've been talking about these lockdown lessons, things that God is trying to teach us through all of this. And today, I want to talk about something that has affected all of us. I think every person through this has had some plans that have been canceled or that have been drastically altered. I mean, wouldn't you agree? It's true of everybody I know. And so as I was mapping out this series a few weeks ago, I said to my wife, Norma Jean, I think I'm going to do one of the lessons all about holding our plans more loosely. You know what my sweet wife, my sweet, normally supportive wife said to me? Oh, don't do that. That is so depressing. People don't want to be reminded of that. I think I touched a sore spot. Now, she's right. I mean, it can be depressing, but it doesn't have to be. If we look at this right, this can actually be an exciting thing. It could be something that really expands us. So, in honor of my wife, today's lockdown lesson is hold your plans loosely. So let's look at today's scripture. We're in James chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. Hear the word of the Lord. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. This is the word of God. So today, I want to talk about two very simple things, holding tightly and holding loosely. So two ways that we can approach our plans for the future. We can hold them tightly or we can hold them loosely. So first, let's talk about holding tightly. In this section of James's letter, he's talking to business people, merchants. And in the first century Roman Empire, it was very common for business people to travel to different cities where there was a market for their product, whatever product it was, clothing or tents or gardening equipment or whatever it was, and carry on their business in that location. So apparently, James had heard merchants talking about their business plans. But tomorrow we're going to take off for the city of Philippi, and we're going to spend a year there. We think the market is very favorable there. We think we're going to be very lucrative this coming year. And so they were specific plans. This was careful planning. These were not people who were just going to kind of go with the flow and see what happened. They had done their research. They knew the market. They had made contact with key civic leaders in the city where they were heading. They had gathered their supplies and mobilized their staff. These were people who realized that if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. And they had no intention of failing because they had a plan. So how about you? How much of a planner are you? Back when I was a teenager, I had this strong admiration for Arnold Schwarzenegger, and not just his bodybuilding success, although I was kind of enamored with that, I'm ashamed to say. But I was mostly impressed with how he had planned out his life. Did you know that when he was a kid, growing up in Austria, Arnold decided that he would go to America, which was hard enough in itself, that he would become the greatest bodybuilder who ever lived, and that he would parlay his bodybuilding success into a Hollywood acting career? Check, check, check. And I remember seeing that as a young person and thinking, man, that is so cool. He laid out his plan, he worked his plan, he accomplished his goals. I love that. And so as I went through my teenage years, I developed my plan. It became evident pretty soon that I was never going to be a professional bodybuilder. I know, shocking, you probably think I could have, but didn't work out. But I was into sports, and I was fascinated with human nutrition. And so here was my plan. I would become an MD nutritionist, specializing in sports medicine and sports nutrition. Also, I would live by the ocean and drive a convertible Mercedes. So that's all. That was my plan, and I was fully intending on accomplishing it. I realize you're probably laughing at my plan right now. But let's talk about you more. How about you? What kind of plans do you have for the future? I know many of you, some of you are very detailed, careful planners. You have a clear vision for your future. Some of you are a little more laid back about it. But we all have plans for our future in one way or another. And I'm not just talking about big life plans. I mean, you've probably got some plans for this summer, don't you? Maybe things that you were hoping to have done in the spring, maybe a trip that got canceled you're hoping to take. You've probably got summer plans. You probably have plans for this week, things that you have on your schedule that you plan to get done this week. Let's just make it really short term. You probably have some plans for the rest of today, right? I mean, this is just how humans work. We really can't survive without making any plans. So back to those first century merchants, James says to them, listen, mister, I'm going to travel to this city and I'm to this particular city and I'm going to make all this money. Let's talk about reality. You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. Now, when he said that, James really is showing that he was a good student of Hebrew wisdom literature. Look what we read in Proverbs 27, verse 1. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Is this not a great description of life under the coronavirus? I mean, we do not know what will happen tomorrow. We really don't know what a day may bring. I've been working with several couples in preparation for their summer weddings. About 2 weeks ago, I got a call from the bride, actually a very good friend of my family's, and she informed me that the wedding that had been scheduled for the end of April, which when all this happened, they postponed to the end of July, now is being pretty much canceled. They're just doing something small with immediate family. The next day, I got a call from another guy whose August wedding we've been planning. He told me they might stick with the August date, but then again, they might not. And so I'm keeping that date reserved on my calendar, but I don't know what's going to happen. My high school son and my college daughter have finished up their spring semesters. My son is still finishing up high school from home. This coming September, will they get to go back to school in person, everybody together? I don't know. What this coronavirus pandemic has been reminding us of is that life is filled with I don't knows. And it's true under coronavirus, but what James is reminding us of is it's always been true. Life has so many unknowns, so much unpredictability about the future. And then he gets a little more personal. He says, you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. In other words, you're so confident in your annual business plan, you don't even know if you'll be alive this time next year. Whew. I know there's somebody listening right now going, I agree with his wife. This is depressing. Turn on that Joel Osteen fella. He's always happy. Just wait a minute. Just bear with me here. Why would James come down so hard on people with a plan? I mean, isn't it a mature, adult, responsible thing to plan for the future? Absolutely. James is not faulting us for making plans. He's talking about the way that we plan. And that becomes really clear in verse 16. As it is, he says, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. See, this is not about planning. This is about planning with boasting and arrogance, overly confident planning, making plans with sort of this attitude of invincibility, like watch me pull this off. It's about holding your plan so tightly you don't even consider the possibility that maybe it won't play out that way. And you go, okay, but why would he call that evil? I mean, isn't that a little harsh? It's not, because when we hold our plans that tightly, we are putting ourselves in the place of God. That is not a good place to put ourselves. That's a dangerous place to put ourselves. There is only one being in the universe who can speak with that kind of confidence, and it's not you, and I know it's not me. So, how do you know if you're doing this? I mean, how do I know if I am holding on to my plans too tightly? Here's the best way to discern it. Ready? Look at how you respond when your plans don't work out. It's the best way to tell how tightly you're holding your plans. Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so when life punches you in the mouth through sickness or through the stock market collapsing or through the coronavirus, whatever thing changes your plans and your plans fall apart, how do you respond? What does that do to you inside? My family recently made a really big decision. About 2 weeks ago, we decided that we would finally cut the cord with cable TV. Oh yeah, we did. We've been thinking about it for about a year. We finally made the decision, and so felt really good about that. And so I now had 3 cable boxes that had been connected to 3 televisions in our house. I had a modem that I had been renting from Cablevision. I don't know why I did that. And I had a bunch of remotes that I had to return to Cablevision. And so one day, a couple of weeks ago, I came up with a plan. Over lunch, I would take all those things, and I would drive up to the nearest Cablevision place to me, which is up in Oakland, and I would return the boxes, and it would just feel really good to get that off of my list, to accomplish that project. So I boxed up my cable boxes and my modem and my remotes, put them in a box, drove up to Oakland. It's about a 20-minute trip, so it'd be about a 40-minute round trip. I got up there, I parked, I took my box, I walked to the door. There on the door of Cablevision, it said, due to COVID-19, this location has been closed. Please visit our Randolph or Patterson location. You have got to be kidding me. That was not in my plan at all. And so when I saw that, I felt this kind of irritation and anger begin to rise up inside of me, which is a good sign that I had been holding my plan a little bit too tightly. So I stood there, and then I started looking around for someone to blame, which is another sign that you're holding your plan too tightly. And here came someone. One of the Cablevision workers came walking out of the office. And when he came out the door, I said, hey, I've got these cable boxes and this modem. Can I just drop them off here? Can I just turn them in? He said, I'm sorry, this location is closed. You'll have to go to our Randolph or Patterson location. I didn't want to go to the Randolph or Patterson location. And I said to the guy, look, I drove like a half an hour to get here. I exaggerated a little bit. Does it even say on the website this location is closed? And this poor guy, he said, I'm not sure. I'm really sorry about that. And he was a technician or something. So I stood there in Oakland with my stupid box of cable boxes under my arm, just kind of feeling irritated. I walked back to my car and I thought, I guess I'll just mail them in instead. So I started driving home feeling irritated and disappointed. As I was driving through Wayne, though, I realized, wait a minute, Patterson is actually kind of close to Wayne. I should just go to the Patterson location. And so I put in on Waze on my phone, I put in the address of the Patterson location. Turned out it was only about 12 minutes away from where I was. And I started to get excited about my new improved plan. In fact, I thought my wife's going to be kind of proud of me that I was willing to drive all the way to Patterson just to get this job done. And so I found the place, I parked in Patterson, I put money in the meter, I took my box, I walked up to these steps to get to the building. I came around the corner and there was this line of about 20 people, all wearing masks, all socially distanced, 6 feet apart, snaking down the side of the building, all holding boxes to return. I went to the end of this line and I stood there. And I stood there. The line did not budge. So after about 10 minutes, one of the workers came out of the door and he said, just want to let you know, it's going to be at least an hour before we help the last person in the line. There was no way I was standing there for an hour. So I took my stupid box and I walked back to my car and I started driving toward home feeling like a complete failure. Now, I got back home about an hour and a half after I had left, having accomplished nothing. And there was this feeling of frustration, of irritation, not as bad as it used to be because God is really working on me. But it was irritating because instead of being efficient Dave who got the job done, instead of being hero Dave who drove all the way to the heart of Patterson to do this thing for my family, I was idiot Dave who should have just mailed the stuff back in the first place. My plan had been ruined. How do you know when you're holding your plans too tightly? Because when your plan gets ruined, you get angry, you get resentful, you look around for someone to blame. Now, I used a relatively small example, right? I mean, driving some cable boxes back is not a big deal. But in bigger life issues, that anger and that blaming can settle into your soul and really become bitterness. A friend of mine was a great high school wrestler. And when he got to his senior year, he was poised to be one of the best wrestlers in the state, very possibly even ranked nationally. But early in his senior season, he got injured really badly. And so the plan that he had for that season was gone just like that. And so for the rest of the season, he had to sit on the sidelines and watch as his team wrestled. So did he focus on his healing from his injury and cheer on his team? Not really. He felt like he couldn't. He was so angry that his plan had been ruined. In his words, I was a spoiled brat. I was arrogant and selfish. And so to deal with the disappointment, he started to drink heavily. And he said, to this day, I regret the influence that I had on the people around me. How do you know when you're holding a plan too tightly? When it doesn't work out, you get angry and resentful. You lash out at other people. Sometimes the disappointment is so deep that you try to numb it. Corrie ten Boom once said, I have learned that we must hold everything loosely because when I grip it too tightly, it hurts when God pries my fingers loose and takes it from me. So we all have plans, but when we hold our plans so stubbornly and then those plans change, it hurts. And many times we respond to that hurt by hurting the people around us. So, how can we go about this whole planning thing in a wiser way? Well, point number 2, let's talk about holding loosely. Holding loosely. So the right way to do this is found in verse 15. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. That sounds so simple, right? But I'm telling you, it is a life-changing concept. And it affects, first of all, the way we talk. You ought to say, if it is the Lord's will. You know, you look at the example of Paul in the New Testament, who had all kinds of, itinerary and visions and plans, and you hear him taking James's advice and talking like this frequently. Here's just one example. Acts 18:21. Paul, it says, but as he left, he promised, I will come back if it is God's will. So he had a plan, right? But he was holding it loosely. Yeah, I'll be back. That's my plan if it is God's will. Which is why Paul the Apostle was much godlier than my childhood hero, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who said simply, I'll be back. But that's another story altogether. Centuries ago, it's interesting, it was common for Christians to close their letters. So you see this down on the bottom of a letter, it would say, Deo volente, which is Latin for God willing. And it was just a way to say, I've just written you this letter, but I just want you to know that everything I just told you in this letter, God ultimately has veto power over all of that, right? So it was a way of holding your plans loosely. So when we take this to heart, it changes the way that we talk about our plans, how we present them to others. But here's the thing. It's not just the way we talk. This is really a mindset. It's an attitude that realizes that God is God and I'm not. And I'm submitting myself to him. So even if I don't actually say the words, God willing, we can approach life with this recognition that all of our plans are ultimately at the discretion of God's bigger plan. Now, I realize this brings up a really hard question. It's easy to talk about God's plan overriding our plan when we're talking about little things, right? So my plan was to return my cable boxes to Cablevision, and I'm comfortable saying, but that was not God's plan. God was not willing that I do that. So somehow it was God's plan that the Oakland location be closed. It was God's plan that there be a huge line at the Patterson location. And so my plan was to return the boxes, but that was not fitting into God's plan. Okay, I can accept that. Annoying, but okay. But the question is, what about when our plans get ruined in much more painful ways? My friend who just called me and said that she's basically canceling her wedding. Are we saying that it was not God's will for her to have that wedding? Does God work that way? And what about in more tragic things? What if you've been the victim of mistreatment somehow? Are you saying that was God's plan? Difficult ethical questions come up. And here's what I'm saying. The biblical answer is that yes, God is in control of everything. But let me quickly add, that doesn't mean that God is the author of anything that's evil or wrong. You know, God did not create the Black Plague or the Spanish flu or coronavirus. God didn't come up with those. God doesn't make anyone do evil things, right? God sometimes allows those things. But here is the point. God is big enough and God is brilliant and sovereign enough to take even those kinds of things and turn them and work them into his overall plan. So there's a sovereignty to God that he can turn things, even that were intended for evil, and he can use them to serve his good purposes. Even the effects of sin in the world, even viruses, even cancer, God can take those things and masterfully turn those things and incorporate those in his plan. When we recognize that God is in it, that God is sovereign, it gives us a sense of submitting ourselves to whatever that larger plan is. In other words, in our words, and especially in our hearts, we say, well, here are my plans if it is God's will. So, how do you know if you're doing this right? How do you know if I'm actually holding my plans loosely? Same answer as before. Ask yourself, how do you respond when your plans get ruined? When life punches you in the mouth and your plan doesn't come through, how do you respond? Let me suggest 3 responses, good responses, of people who are holding their plans loosely when those plans don't come through. First, grieve. Yeah, we're back to this again. The first lockdown lesson that we talked about in this series was allowing ourselves to grieve because we're human. And when we've been planning something and looking forward to something and it doesn't happen, it hurts. And so to not express that hurt, to not even acknowledge it, it wouldn't be human. It would be, robotic. It is so good to know that the Bible is filled with godly grieving. It's called lament, inviting God into your pain and your grief. So when your plans don't work, give yourself a little space. Give yourself a little time to grieve that loss. The bigger the disappointment, the more time and the more space you should probably give yourself to grieve it. Cry out to God. Talk to him about it. This also means, by the way, that when somebody you know has their plans ruined, allow them to grieve. Don't rush too quickly to the Christian cliches. When that good friend called a couple of weeks ago informing me that her wedding that had been postponed from April to July and now is being canceled, when she called with those news, what if I had said to her, well, God works all things for good, so I'm sure the plan's going to work out great. She would have rightfully wanted to smack me. I'm grateful for social distancing, so nobody can smack me. No, but I didn't say that. I've learned some things about grieving, especially recently. And so when she shared that bad news with me, I said to her, I'm so sorry. That must be so disappointing to you. And I think in that moment, that was probably the most loving thing to say. So when I say hold your plans loosely, I don't mean that when your plans get changed, you go, yay, my plans are ruined. Let yourself be human. Let yourself grieve a little. God is okay with that. But then, here's the second thing, trust. Trust that whatever happened, it's not random, that God is in it. One of the guys in my small group last week said, I take comfort knowing God is in control because that takes the pressure off of me to have to be in control. Yes, exactly. Trust him. One of our former pastors on staff at the chapel, gosh, it's been 12 years, I think, since he's been with us, was Pastor Matt DiLorenzo. And Matt loved telling stories, and I remember him telling a story about his childhood. His dad was an NJ Transit bus driver, and Matt used to sometimes sit on his dad's bus and ride along with him. So Matt said, my dad was this master driver. He would pull out of the Port Authority in New York City and just weave in and out of these cones. He said he was like a race car driver in that bus. So Matt tells this story about sitting in his dad's bus once, and it was snowing, and the roads were getting slippery. And the bus was coming down Ratzer Road in Wayne, if you know the steep part of that road. And so cars were starting to skid off the road and get stuck. And so Matt said his dad had this trick. He actually hopped the right side wheels of the bus up onto the curb to get more traction. And so you could feel the bus just go boom, boom. And he said the people in the bus were holding on like this and terrified, thinking they were out of control. Matt says, I was sitting there in that front seat without a care in the world. And I'll never forget him saying, you know why I wasn't scared? Because I knew who was driving the bus. Listen, when your plans change and you're tempted to think, man, it's out of control, everything's gone crazy, remember who's driving the bus. Your Father's in control. He's good, he loves you, and he's got this. Trust. When your plans change, trust. And then third, here's the last thing, be present. Be present. Centuries ago, John Wesley wrote this, listen, realizing the future is uncertain not only teaches us to trust in God, it helps us to properly value the present. To be obsessed with future plans may cause our failure to appreciate present blessings or our evasion of present duties. In other words, when you're done grieving the loss of that graduation or that vacation or that wedding or whatever future thing happens to change your plans. Because remember, this is not just a pandemic thing, right? This is something that will happen in your life for the rest of your life. So when that plan changes and it hurts and you've taken some time to grieve the loss, then let go of the old and be fully present to the new. Be present to what God is doing now. Man, you look at the life of Jesus, and he so modeled this approach to life. There's a story in Luke chapter 8 where Jesus is on his way to heal a sick little girl. She's gravely ill. So the plan is we're going to go directly to her house and take care of this girl. I mean, it seemed like a pretty important plan. But on his way to doing that, there was a woman in the crowd around him that was desperate for her own healing. She had been suffering from a socially shameful kind of sickness for years and years. And so in this crowd surrounding Jesus, she had snuck up and just touched the edge of his cloak. And as soon as that happens, Jesus stops and he says, "Who touched me?" And his disciples basically say to him, "Jesus, you're surrounded by people all around you. Don't worry about that. Let's get on with the plan." But that just wasn't how Jesus worked. He said, no, I know someone touched me. Who was it? And so this woman is now terrified because she's been exposed, and she comes forward and identifies herself. And Jesus stops everything. He gives her his full attention. He speaks with her. He blesses her. He heals her. He sends her away with words of encouragement. Now, none of that was in Jesus' plan. And yet Jesus realized this must be in my Father's plan. Think about this. It could be that the most important thing that God has planned for you this week is nowhere on your Outlook calendar. You realize that's probably pretty likely. And yet, if you are so fixated on your plan, on getting your agenda done, you may miss the very thing that God needs you to see the most. Realize as you go about your plans that the interruptions that happen, when your plans don't work out and you feel disappointed by that, those are the times to be fully present. What is God doing through this? So man, make your plans, but hold them loosely. I often get the privilege of walking into a hospital room where somebody is on their deathbed. And those are sacred moments. And yet I've found in those moments that sometimes the person lying in that bed, there's like a panic that sets in. And they're so fearfully holding on to life. And maybe 10 years or so ago, I feel like God gave me something to share at those moments. I open up the Bible to the Gospel of John, chapter 10, and I read where Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. I know my sheep, and they know me. And then he says, and no one can snatch them out of my hand. And then I actually take the person's hand, and I say to them, listen, you need to know that Jesus is holding you so tightly. He will never let you go. He's got you. And so it's okay for you to let go. And there are times when I can physically just see the person just relax. I can see the tension go out of their face. I can see the peace just flood into them as they respond to the promise of Jesus. It's an amazing moment. But here's what I've realized. Those words are not just for people on their deathbeds. Because we all have this tendency to go through life like this, to hold on, to be so tightly clutching of our plans, our dreams for our future, our very lives. and sooner or later, that approach to life is not going to work out. When we finally realize that we're not in control at all, man, that's going to be a bad and sad day. And so we hear James in this passage inviting us to hold our plans loosely. But there's something in us that says, I can't do that. I mean, that sounds terrifying, that I don't want to let go. Here's why you can. Here's why you can hold them loosely. Because Jesus is not letting you go. He's got you. Think about this for a minute. Jesus went to the cross willingly to die for your sins so you could be reconciled with your Creator. Think of that depth of love that he has for you. And then on the third day, he rose back to life, which means he is alive for you. And he said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I've got you. I'm holding you so tightly so you really can hold loosely. The only reason that any of this is possible is because of Jesus. That's the only reason we can actually live out what James is calling us to do. If you don't know Jesus personally, if you've never turned to him in faith, don't let this day go by without doing that. Just say, yes, I believe. I don't have control, but you do. You died for me. You rose for me. I receive you. We can do this only because of Jesus. You know, this pandemic is not going to last forever. It's beginning to loosen up a little bit, right? And in a few weeks or probably a few months, we'll start to feel fairly back to normal. Some people will emerge from this exactly like they were before, maybe even more control freakish, holding on to their plans desperately, even more angry and resentful when their plans get changed. But not you. Because through this time, you're going to grow a little bit wiser about how life works and about how God works. And so you're still going to have plans, but you're going to hold them loosely. And it won't be a cynical thing, like, well, here's my plan, but it'll probably get ruined. No, it'll be an exciting thing. It'll be a wondrous thing. Like, yeah, here's what I'm planning, but man, I admit I don't know what's around the next corner, but God does. And my God is so good, and my God is so loving toward me. He's so for me that if he's got different plans for me, man, I am all